The last thing we need to learn to complete our set of basic AutoCAD skills is how to annotate our drawings and how to print them. First of all, to annotate, we need to put in dimensions. And there are quite a few different dimension tools out there. Here, let me expand my tools menu, and you will see that in the text area alone, there are quite a few different ones. There are also different kinds of dimensions, linear ones, continued ones, center marks. Finally, there are leader lines, notes with leader lines. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just narrow that down a little bit, and I'm just going to show you the basic ones here. And again, as before, I'm going to type in the command. First of all, to put in a dimension, but if you type in DIMLIN, that is a linear dimension. This is the most common kind, and this is the kind I think we'll find the most useful in our project. So you choose that, just click on it. And the way it works is you click on different points on your drawing, and what AutoCAD will do, and I'll just choose these two endpoints here, it will put in a dimension between whatever 2 points you click, and it will force that dimension to always be horizontal. Now this is of course an interiors project, so where we're going to want to use interior dimensions, I'll just hit enter to activate DIMLIN again. Okay, and I'll drag this off. We can also try to put in some dimensions for some of the smaller spaces, for example. And again, these are going to be clear dimensions. You see how AutoCAD puts the dimensions off to the side when it doesn't have space to put them. And you're going to want to make sure to always use endpoints for these types of dimensions. So check your OSNAP settings and make sure you don't have things like nearest set. And again, sometimes a little aggressive scrolling will help you to get that space. When you are trying to align the dimension strings, each of these is called a string, just move your mouse over the adjacent dimension. Once you have that endpoint, you can click and they will snap together. Okay. Same with down here. Go with DIMLIN again, get my endpoints going, and then use the endpoint as a reference. Among other things, you can change the style of dimensions, both the text and whether or not they use ticks or arrows, using the dim style command, but we're not going to do that. It's a little complicated. So that is putting in dimensions. What about if we want to put in room names? Room names can be put in two ways. If you have thought of it in advance, so in a room like this where there's no flooring, you can put in piece of text, the hatching will go around it. To do that, you type in mtext, and mtext stands for multi-line text. Just draw the box. It's like a text box that you'll see in other programs, and you can come in here and type the name of the room. Let's type in porch, and of course, this is just like a text editor. You can center the text, you can change its size and other features, whether or not it's bolded or underlined, and then just click Save when you're done. So what you'll find is if you put in the text this way, hatch patterns will go around it. Let's see if that's really true. We'll click inside here, and yes, indeed, they do. Of course, I've changed the size of the box around that text, so you'll want to make sure that you don't leave a lot of empty space. What if you already have a hatch pattern in here, or you have some other pattern you don't want to obscure? In that case, you're going to want to use what's called a leader line, which is basically a line with an arrow on it. And the command for that is QLeader, and which stands for Quick Leader. When you choose that option, click once to kind of plant the arrow. Click again to kind of plant the other end of the arrow, and then I'm going to tap Command L so that I get a nice straight line at the end. This is just kind of a graphic standard. So you have an arrow with a tail on it, and then click one more time to place the text. Then you just begin to type. And in this case, we'll call this dining room. You can see the text being entered next to my keyboard. Hit enter twice to finish editing the text. And it even aligns it with the endpoint of the arrow. And it's nice to line up all your text. So what some people will do is make a copy of the text and the leader line. I'll just do this, copy, drag it up, so that all the notes align. You can also use some of the alignment tools to allow you to do that. Okay, and this one will change. Just double click on the text to edit it, And you'll notice that AutoCAD is very smart. It has right justified it. And you can modify the arrow if you want later on. So this is a nice way to get the names of your rooms in. And I would do one more for the toilet room. So our goal here is to have all of these rooms created and labeled, dimensioned, and have flooring material of some sort and some furnishings of some sort. And this will be a test of your basic set of skills. Before printing, one last thing you're going to want to do is just give your drawing one last check over to make sure that things are looking the way you want, and also to see if the line weights and the text all make sense. You don't want text overlapping with each other. You don't want arrows going through or obscuring notes or other objects. And also, sometimes what you'll see is that you'll want line weights that don't always follow the layer settings. So first of all, when I look at this, I see that some of these chairs didn't quite trim the way that I wanted them to. So I can select the objects, the parts of the chair, to trim out these extra floor lines here. You usually will notice this stuff, about 30 seconds after you send it to print, but it is nice to check. Now, the other thing is that sometimes as you look at objects, you want a little bit more variation in line weights. I think that this carpet could use some different line weights, but I'm going to need to ungroup these lines, because if I start changing these willy-nilly, it's probably going to change all the lines in the group. So you can just right-click on it and choose Ungroup. There we go. Now I have access to all these different pieces here. I can just select them by clicking on them. No need to hold down Shift. And then once I've done that, I can come down here and the line weight, which is normally by layer, I can just choose some other value. Maybe 30 is a good line weight. Give me a little bit more darkness. And now you can see that, and it looks a lot nicer. So now we are ready to print our masterpieces. And one of the things that you need to know when you print is that you don't usually print from model space. You usually print from paper space. So I'm going to switch over here to my 24 by 36 sheet. And what we have here is a big blank sheet of white paper with a title block on it and a couple of views into our model. Now, each of these views is actually a rectangle, special kind of rectangle called a viewport. And what you'll notice is that you can double click inside that viewport and suddenly you are in model space. This viewport is kind of like a hole in your sheet of paper back into the model. And any change that you make, for example, if I deleted this and double-clicked outside of the viewport, you might say, that's good. I didn't want to see that anyway. Well, when I go back to the model, I have now deleted that drawing. So don't do that. Don't get rid of things that you see in your paper space viewports. Just be sure that any editorial changes you make in these areas are ones that you want to have happen. Now, first of all, when you set up your viewports, the first thing is that these viewports want to be on the viewport layer. There's a special layer, and the reason that it's special is just because it doesn't print. So you won't see these boxes. You also don't usually see the grid unless you tell AutoCAD to print the grid. Finally, you do want to hide certain things. Now, we have drawn the floor plan and the reflected ceiling plan right in the same location. So if I double click inside this viewport, I want to hide the reflected ceiling plan items. And the way that you can do that is you just go to your Layers menu, which I seem to have closed, and I'll type in layer to get there. And that you're going to want to freeze anything that is not supposed to show up in this floor plan viewport. So as a reminder, I am inside the viewport. You see how you have that dark outline? And now watch what happens when I freeze certain layers. You'll see that the little bit of lighting that I've put in here, for example, will disappear. Don't turn that layer off, because that turns it off everywhere. Just use this special freeze thaw column that is inside this viewport. What else goes in there? Well, anything with RCP on it. There we go. I think that's about it. And now what you'll see is that the viewport, and I'll just dock this little guy here, should look like a floor plan. So one thing that is really important once you've kind of started laying out your sheet and controlling the layers is make sure you know which viewport you're in and which layers you're turning on and off. So in this plan view, again, I double-clicked inside the plan view, I made sure to turn off all the layers associated with the reflected ceiling plan. So obviously it's important that you label things correctly, you assign layers correctly to the objects, and then make sure that your layers are something that you're going to know is a reflected ceiling plan layer versus a plan layer. And there are many different ways to do this. There's AIA standards, American Institute of Architects, and then there's just the way your office does them, which is probably more important than AIA standards. So if I go to my reflected ceiling plan, it should be pretty clear which layers get frozen in this viewport. I'm going to want to freeze doors because you don't show those, and I'm going to want to freeze this dimensions in plan and elevation because I'm looking at the reflected ceiling plan. Obviously, I want to freeze flooring. And again, make sure you click the freeze button, not the on-off button. In fact, let me show you. When I click the on-off button, you see how all the flooring disappears from both views. Well, we don't want that. We want the flooring in our plan view, just not the reflected ceiling plan view. Now, it looks to me like I accidentally put my dimensions on the flooring view because they all went off. If you did have something on the wrong dimension, by all means go to the viewport where they show up, select your dimensions, and in this case they're pretty clear which ones are which, and put them on the layer that you think makes the most sense. In this case, dimensions in plan and elevation are what makes the most sense. All right, going back to the reflected ceiling plan, there's a few other things that are showing up here that you shouldn't see, including the toilets, unless for some reason you have toilets on the ceiling. I'm guessing probably not. And furniture. You can save these conditions, this layer state it's called, as a separate object or definition, and it's called a layer state. You can add a new one and call it, RCP or something like that. And this is really handy when you're working in an office and you want to have production speed. It helps to do that. Now, last things you can do as you're looking at the reflected ceiling plan. First of all, once you're in the viewport, anything you draw, you will actually, be drawn in model space. So if I put myself on the layer dimensions in reflected ceiling plan, and let's say I just want to put a dimension on this linear light fixture that I put over my fireplace, I can just type in dimlin, and as long as I'm on a layer, dimensions in reflected ceiling plan, that shows up in reflected ceiling plan, the dimension will show up here, but not in floor plan. And again, this is a really great way to have all your lighting, for example, should have a dimension on it. There we go, so that you can locate it. If you need to move the dimension string, by the way, you can just click on it and use one of the grips to try to move the notes out of the way. You can also create your own symbols. So I added a bunch of lighting fixtures here, a chandelier, a linear fixture, a box fixture for the toilet, something for the mirror. But let's say I need an exit sign. I can just draw a box here. Oops, except I'm on the wrong layer. Got to be on the lighting layer. There we go. That's a lot darker. And then I'll draw the X in the middle, which is typical of the way you represent an exit sign. So there you go. You can start to develop your reflected ceiling plan. You'll need to put in some lighting of your own. The other thing that you can do in your reflected ceiling plan viewport is you can make a little key for your light fixtures. And the way you do that, you copy over each of the different light fixtures that you have. Okay, and I'll just copy a few of these to get myself going. And then you put in a piece of text. And remember, mtext is the command to do that. I'll just draw a little box here, and I'll call this toilet fixture. Let's move this down so that it's nice and neat. And then we can copy that text. And when you copy it, try to use the ortho feature. I just turned it on by using Command L. That way all your text lines up nice and neatly. And here you can type in exit sign. Finally, as we did in the floor plan, we can override some settings for individual items. So for example, let's say I want a title for this little key here, and I'll call it RCP Legend. I can override this text and make it a little bit bigger than my other text. For example, I can make it 12 inches. Remember that 12 inches in scale is going to be whatever scale we're at, 1/4 inch scale. And you see how that's a bigger text, but any further text that I put in will be the original size. One thing you can do to kind of gussy up this legend, make it a little neater, is you can, first of all, align the light symbols. So I'm going to just draw a line from the center point of this symbol. I'm going to draw it straight down. And of course, I don't want that line to print. So I'm going to just put it on a layer that I know doesn't print, and that's the viewports layer. Okay, you can make your own layers that don't print, but this one's easy enough. And now I can move these objects, just select them and hit the move button and drag it over until it aligns. It is handy to have the perpendicular OSnap running. And then you can move your text around to make the whole thing nice and neat. Put a box around the legend as need be. Space out the symbols so that everything is a little easier to read. There we go. Starting to look a little bit nicer. There we go. There's a nice RCP legend. Maybe I'll just move the whole thing over ever so slightly. There we go. Beautiful. One last thing that you can do in your reflected ceiling plan is put labels for your rooms back in there. There's a couple ways you could do this. You could put the room labels on a layer which shows up in both views, plan and reflected ceiling plan. But another fun way to do this is, and probably a better way to do this, is I'm going to make a copy of these pieces of text. I'm just going to move them over a little bit. Then I'll select my copies. Make sure to get your leader lines if there are any. And I'll move those to a reflected ceiling plan layer. And the reason is because the ceiling plan may have things which are in the way. See how close this is to the dimension? That doesn't really look right. So you'll want to have the flexibility to move objects without having to worry about their overlapping with that elements. All right, the last thing that I want to talk about is scale. Now, scale is super important. If you select both of these viewports, actually, and let's look at their properties. I'm going to stretch this out ever so much so it's a little easier to read. Properties for viewports have one special feature, which is the scale of the viewport. Now, if we look down here under miscellaneous, and again, if you're not seeing it, maybe you have it under my as opposed to all. But in this case, because I look at it often, it's visible here too. So again, under the element over here, you can see, first of all, the viewport is on. I could turn the viewport off. I don't know why I would do that, but I can. You can have viewports with different scales on them. So, for example, here's this viewport down here. I did not lock the scale, as you can see here. So I can set it to be anything I want. Maybe what I'll do is I'll zoom in on one portion of the floor plan so that we can see it in greater detail. What you can do, click outside of the viewport again, and then just click on the edge of the viewport, not inside it. Now you've selected the viewport like we did before, and you can set the scale to something other than 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to go with 1/2 of an inch equals a foot, or maybe even 3/4. We can fit a lot in here. Now what you'll notice is that the annotation scale did not change. You'll want to make sure that that's 3/4 also. When I did that, the dimensions disappeared. Let me do that again. When I go to 1/4 inch and I set the annotation scale to 1/4 of an inch, the dimensions are there. As soon as I change these both to 3/4 of an inch, the notes go away as well. And this is because the notes are annotative. They depend on the scale of the drawing. Anyway, this viewport we can treat like we did before. Double click inside it, and I can come in here, set my current layer to dimension in plan, and I can put in further, more detailed dimensions here. For example, I can do my dim_lin command, and I can dimension the center of these chairs. Do that. There we go. And those dimensions do not show up on any of the other views. Once you've got your viewports laid out, the last part is changing the text to be text relevant to your project. You just find where the text is. In this case, the text is separate than the viewport, and just double click on it. Now what you'll see is in the past, when you double clicked on a block, you ended up editing the block. In this case, I double clicked on the text and I ended up with this strange menu. This is called the Enhanced Attribute Editor. And what this does is, this is a special kind of block where the elements of the block aren't just pieces of text or other objects. They have attributes, and you can edit those attributes. So for example, the designer name, well, I don't want it to say Endicott Grads. I can click on that, and you see how it changes on the title page. Sheet number, fine for A1. For Endicott, we can call this the Endicott Tea House Cafe. There we go. And you can see how it fits. To edit the actual title block lines, you'd have to select the title block, not double click on it, right click on it, and choose Block Editor. Now you're back in familiar territory. You can make changes to lines. You could put your photograph up in the corner. You can do any number of things. Just be aware that when you change these pieces of text, these are special pieces of text that have attributes. Finally, we're ready to print. And actually, even printing, we're not really ready because you don't usually print directly from AutoCAD. What you do is you save your view as a PDF. To do that, go to Print or Plot, as it's actually called here in AutoCAD land. Command P works or Control P works just like every other one. Now these drawings have already been configured to work on our printers, so hopefully you won't mess around with the page setup. And my recommendation, by the way, is if you have a new project that you're starting in AutoCAD, that you basically copy and paste that drawing into this project. Rename it as a new file name and use it essentially as a template. I think that will work a lot better for you than trying to start fresh, mainly because there's a lot of settings in here that have been tweaked to work on our systems that you don't want to have to do twice. Anyway, as you'll see, there is an Arch D size, which is 24 by 36, and there's a special printer called a DWG to PDF, which should hopefully create a very nice PDF for us. Finally, the title block has been set up so that it prints properly. What you'll see is a red outline indicating that there are some elements which go outside of the boundary, but again, as long as its scale is 1:1, you're good. Don't check the Fit to Paper button, because that will change the size of your drawing. Anyway, I'm going to just click the Preview button, and what you should see is your drawing. On a Mac, this opens up in the Preview program. You should see all the elements of your project that you're expecting. Hopefully your line weights are as you were hoping. You may notice that some things are missing. For example, I have no title block here, and I don't have a cut line. I'm going to want to add those in before I go to print. Also, again, check your work. Oh, I don't have a room name for this, and I'm showing the toilet on the ceiling again, which is probably not so you'll want to make those modifications before you send the file to print. But now you have this PDF file. On a Mac, the way to get that PDF file into your project folder is you just choose the Move To option and then browse to put the file in your folder. So here is the Windows version of AutoCAD and its print menu. And when we go to print, and I'll just do Control P to print. First of all, the Windows version has an extra kind of, hello, here's something you might be interested in, something called batch plot, which allows you to print multiple sheets all at once. But for us, once is enough. And I'm just going to continue to plot this single page. The options are basically the same. You're still going to want to avoid Fit to Paper. And you're going to notice that it is giving you an alarm there that the PDF is running up against the edges. Again, that's just the way our pages are set up. And you can and should always do the preview like we did on the Mac side. The only difference is that here we can't just save this directly from the preview menu. We have to go back to the plot button, which is up here in the upper left. So click plot. goes back to the plot menu, and then it will prompt you to save the file. And then just, obviously browse to find a place where you want to save it and hit OK. The other thing that you'll notice is that there is an annoying, what's called a plot stamp, which is up here at the top. It says produced by an Autodesk student version. Of course, they want to remind everybody you didn't pay your thousands of dollars for this Autodesk software. If you open your project on one of the desktop computers and then save the PDF there, that little spot stamp will go away. You can also use something like Photoshop to just erase it. And that is what I'd like you to do for our goal today, is to set up your sheets and get all your drawings in. And what I'll do is I'll redline anything that I think is missing.